Right now, many energy firms are experiencing a cash crunch, so they don't have the funds to invest in technologies to reduce emissions or fix methane leaks. Today's announcement will allow for this kind of work to be done and create jobs people need during this difficult time. Through the wells and methane initiatives, we estimate that we will maintain roughly 10,000 jobs across the country. Just because we're in a health crisis doesn't mean we can neglect the environmental crisis.
Trying to cushion the COVID-19 blow to some of the hardest hit industries. Hi, and welcome to Power and Politics. I'm Vashi Kapelos. Another big financial aid package unveiled in Ottawa today. Let's start with the energy sector. When the global economy shut down, demand for oil fell off a cliff. That, combined with a price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia, pushed Canadian oil prices to a record low, less than $5 a barrel, making it cheaper than a pint of beer. Today, the government responded with a $2.4 billion aid package, but the aid is targeted. $1.7 billion is directed to clean up thousands of abandoned oil wells. The government says that will save 5,000 jobs in Alberta alone. The feds will also spend $750 million to lend energy companies money to cut methane emissions, and that includes $75 million for Newfoundland and Labrador's struggling offshore industry. Otherwise, Ottawa also announced funding today for rural businesses with $962 million for regional development agencies. Another $270 million has been earmarked for entrepreneurs and innovators who don't qualify for the emergency wage subsidy. Think startups. Finally, $500 million will go towards supporting the arts, culture, and sports sectors. So does this money for the oil patch specifically come with any strings, and are the feds willing to offer more help to the energy sector? Bill Morneau is the Minister of Finance. Hi, Minister Morneau. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Minister, does the investment your government announced today to clean up orphan wells come with any strings attached? Will your government, for example, expect Alberta to require a financial guarantee up front from companies that drill these wells in the future?
The important thing that we're trying to do here, as you know, Vashi, is we're trying to make sure that we put money into the Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC economy that will go directly to workers. So that was some of the discussions that we had with the government to make sure that that would happen. So yes, there are some things that we worked on. We wanted to make sure it goes to workers. We wanted to make sure that Alberta is committing to coming up with a system that allows for the remediation of abandoned oil wells to be put on the industry so that it can be sustainable. But most importantly, from our standpoint, is to support those workers, is to get the money out so that we can actually deal with the really big challenges that people are facing in parts of our country.
The second point you made there, Minister, about Alberta coming up with a system, I guess, when it comes to industry and remediation. I just want to be explicit about that because that is a big issue along the way, along many decades with this, right? Industry has not really funded this to the degree that they could or perhaps should. So is there a specific requirement that Alberta make sure they do so going forward attached to this money?
Alberta has committed to working to significantly reduce the impact from these wells. They've committed that they want to make sure that the system is significantly improved. So we worked with them hard on that. We think that that's the right thing for the system. But again, I just want to say that what we were trying to drive towards is to make sure that we actually get rid of these abandoned oil wells in a way that makes sense for our environment, and we do it by getting people to work, people that we know right now are out of work because of the challenges in that part of the country. So I think it's very much a win for employment, and it will be a positive thing for our environment at the same time.
The second part of your announcement today, in addition to the money that you announced for reclaiming those wells, was that you're going to work with the BDC and the EDC to expand credit support for at-risk, medium-sized energy companies. Are you going to backstop credit for oil companies?
The way to think about this is, from what we're looking at, is the biggest challenge is to make sure that our economy can get back up and running after this challenging time. So for many firms, and specifically what we talked about today was firms in the energy sector, they need credit to get through it. What we've come up with here is an approach where the BDC and the EDC are engaged, in order to ensure that those mid-sized companies can get credit. And that's really what they've been asking for. It's not in any way anything other than giving people a bridge towards the future, which is similar to what we announced a couple of weeks ago for smaller organizations through the backstop of the EDC and the BDC for companies across all sectors. So we're going to continue to think about how we can get ourselves to the next steps, and that's really going to be about providing credit where there might not naturally be credit, and that's how the government can provide what we think is essential support, which will drive jobs and it'll drive the ability to have the kind of employment that we need after we get through this crisis.
I just want to make sure I understand and our audience understands in layman's terms. Are you saying, though, that the government will essentially provide money in the form of credit to these energy companies?
The way it will work is that the financial institutions that the companies deal with will be continue to deal with them. It's just that the support, the BDC and the EDC, like was done in 2008, 2009, are actually providing that sort of backstop. And that is going to enable for additional loans to be given to those companies so they can get through this. It's on a commercial basis, so they recognize, and they will recognize that that's the way that they move forward. So we don't want to be in a position where we're doing something that doesn't allow the businesses to keep operating in the appropriate fashion. This worked before. Yeah, as you probably heard, in 2008, 2009, there were thousands upon thousands of companies that availed themselves of this sort of approach, the Business Credit Availability Program, and that's one of the things that allowed us to get through a challenging time then. We think it'll work today again.
If it's on a commercial basis, does that mean that there's no cap to the amount of money that can be lent?
Well, on an individual company-by-company basis, they will be able to. This is really for mid-sized companies, so it's in the $15 to $60 million in credit per company. But it will be based on their business needs. There's no overall cap. It's going to be about the demand from the overall sector. And more broadly, what we're looking at is rolling out a credit that's available across the country for mid-sized companies. And the next step, we also need to look at how we can make sure that the largest of companies have a bridge to the future. So we're always going to be thinking about this on commercially appropriate terms, and we're always going to think about this in terms of credit to get ourselves through this. And we're remembering that the first step in this also helped firms with that wage subsidy by helping them to keep their employees engaged, get money out to people. But that's critically important for the firms as well.
I'm glad you touched on the larger firms, because I did want to ask why this is so specific to the medium size, and if in fact you are intending to address the credit issue with larger companies, what form will that take? We had the CEO of Suncor on a few weeks ago, for example. $40 a barrel oil is needed for them to cover costs, just like medium-sized businesses. We're not anywhere near that right now. What is your government prepared to do for bigger companies, and when will an announcement to that effect be made?
Well, like we've taken this approach really from day one, Vashi, we're trying to deal with the things that we see as so critically important right at the outset. So we started by thinking about people. The emergency response benefit was about the millions of people that would immediately need access to funds for groceries. The wage subsidy was about those people that are attached to firms and making sure they don't get laid off and have access to funding there. So the reason we went out today is because we recognize that the mid-sized firms are the ones that are most in need of access to credit. The larger firms, there are many larger firms that will have a challenging time right now. So we are working on that. I don't have an exact date for you, but those discussions are far along. We're trying to think about how we help firms across all sectors to make sure they can bridge this time and do it in a way that makes financial sense from the standpoint of the firm commercially, but also for the country. And so that's going to take a little more while to have the exact details, and I'll be happy to come back on your show when I have some more to talk about that.
Is your government at all worried about the politics, the optics of subsidizing or bailing out, quote unquote, bigger firms in the oil patch specifically?
Well, I think I wouldn't use either of those words. I would say that what we're trying to do is to make sure that there's the commercially available loans, and that it's on a basis that's appropriate and a commercial basis. So that is not in any way a bailout. That's just helping people to get from here to there, which in a short and deep challenge like we're facing today, we think that's the appropriate way to deal with this crisis. As we have more information, we'll certainly be providing that. But that's the approach we've taken across all the sectors. The only place where we've provided forgivable credit is in those smallest of companies, where we've given that business account, which is up to a $40,000 loan for smaller businesses, with 25% of it forgivable if they pay it off on time. So it's the smallest companies are there, but at every other level, what we're doing is we're providing commercially appropriate credit facilities.
Will the same treatment then be extended, for example, to the airline industry, which the Prime Minister has consistently highlighted alongside tourism and the oil patch as sectors which have been more acutely hit during this crisis? Does that mean that you'll only be offering loans to airlines, for example? There won't be any kind of bailout there either?
We will have more to say on all of the approaches that we're going to take, but I think what you can know is that we're trying to make sure that what we do provides an appropriate bridge. What you saw, though, is important things like the wage subsidy helped many, many large employers, and the airline sector was one of those large employers. You saw Air Canada bring a whole number of employees back on to get that wage subsidy. So that is a support for that company. It's broadly applicable to companies large and small. And that'll be the continuing approach we take. We're trying to be fair across the country to deal with the many, many sectors that are being challenged, and the many, many businesses, large and small, recognizing that they're all facing challenges, and we need to have a way to be fair but support people through this time.
They are all, Minister, facing challenges. But as I said, every time the Prime Minister is asked about sectors which are feeling the pain, maybe more than others, not to say that those others aren't feeling it too, he identifies airlines, tourism, and the oil patch. Is there anything beyond the wage subsidy coming for airlines?
I think he identifies those sectors because we all think about them. The way we've tried to come at this is by thinking about people. So thinking about the fact that, people across the country, and businesses large like those iconic ones that we recognize, and small, bars and restaurants, people are feeling extreme challenges. So that's the focus that we've had, is on how we can support people first and foremost. And then to your second part of your question, is there more coming? The answer is we are working on ideas. We're working on ideas that are founded on the notion that we need to provide credit for businesses to get through this time. So as we have more on that, we'll be out to talk about it. But I know that the large companies in the country that are challenged are in many cases reaching out to us, and we're trying to work with them so they understand where we're going, and we'll have more to say soon.
Okay, I'll leave it there, Minister. Thanks for your time this evening.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
The federal government unveiled its long-awaited help for Canada's oil and gas sector today. It includes $1.7 billion to clean up orphan wells in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia, $750 million to establish an emissions reduction fund that would loan companies money to reduce their methane emissions, and expanded credit support for medium-sized energy companies. A dollar amount has not been tied to that last commitment. The federal finance minister, earlier on the show, said that it would be commercially relevant. The federal government says the first two items, funding for orphan wells and emissions reduction, will maintain roughly 10,000 jobs across the country, at least half of those in Alberta. Jason Nixon is Alberta's Environment Minister. He joins us now from Edmonton, I believe. Hi, Minister. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
I hope I'm right. Are you in Edmonton?
I am in Edmonton.
Okay,
yes.
good. I guess correctly. Minister, I wanted to start off with something that Finance Minister Bill Morneau told me earlier in the show. He said that the federal funding for abandoned wells came with a commitment from your government to essentially, I just want to get the exact quote right here. Alberta has committed to working to significantly reduce the impact from these wells. They've committed that they want to make sure the system is significantly improved, and that the remediation of abandoned wells would be put on the industry. What exactly does that mean? What did your government commit to?
Well, we've committed to exactly what the statement is that you just read. This is something that we've already been committed to in Alberta. In the 2019 election, we ran on clear commitments to begin to work on the abandoned well issue and the orphan well issue in the province of Alberta, and making sure that the industry was driving the solution to what has been a longstanding issue for the industry and for the province of Alberta. In fact, you'll probably recall this announcement today when it comes to abandoned and orphan wells. We were already starting to have conversations with the feds even prior to where the current economic crisis and the COVID-19 crisis. So this is something that Minister Savage, our Minister of Energy, and myself as the Minister of Environment have already been working on with our regulator. So we are happy to reaffirm that commitment. And then we will continue to work on what will be a long-term framework around how we manage abandoned and orphan wells to make sure that the industry who is ultimately responsible for them plays a role in their cleanup. Now, that's obviously going to take longer to implement than originally planned, because now we have to focus on the immediate crisis that we find ourselves in. But by us committing to that, we commit that we will continue down that path in the years to come.
I want to ask you a couple of quick specifics about what that commitment looks like. From my understanding and from my time in Alberta, the biggest issue was that there was no commitment up front from industry, from the companies, which eventually went broke after a time. And so there was no sort of security for the fact that they would have to clean these up. Is your government prepared, for example, to force industry to pay a price at the beginning to ensure that that cleanup does happen down the road?
Our government was prepared certainly to work and to put ultimately something in along the lines of what you're referring to. I want to be clear, things have changed a little bit in the moment that we're in. So we began that work when we were revamping our Alberta energy regulator and having this conversation with the industry on the path forward. It was in a different economic context. And so while we are prepared to do that, and the industry is prepared to do that, obviously our main focus in the short term will be on making sure that the industry survives and is able to provide the wealth that it provides to the country and to the province. But we are reaffirming to the federal government that we still long-term intend to continue down that track. And this is not something that surprises the industry. The industry supports that. It's something the industry wants to work on with the province to solve long-term.
I take your point, obviously, about the sort of acute economic pain being felt right now, specifically in that sector. But when you say long term, what does that mean? Does that mean that there might be a new regulatory environment in 2 years, in 3 years? What does it mean?
Well, Minister Savage, our Minister of Energy, and myself, we're working on a revamp with our regulator that was within the platform that we ran on the 2019 election. And we have gone a long way with that, including restructuring the regulator, appointing a new board and new officials, and putting in a process that would ultimately be able to help with many issues within our regulatory system, but of course this issue as well. And we were moving along towards legislation on this issue. Unfortunately, again, because of the crisis we're in, we're not going to, we have to now take a step back, understand where the industry is, understand the economics, and have other conversations with the industry to make sure that the path that we were taking this fall is actually going to work for what will be the long-term circumstances in the Alberta oil and gas industry. But what we are committed to is once we have stability within the sector, that we will continue to do that work. Unfortunately, I don't think anybody really knows the timeline at the moment, which is why I think the feds were clear that they just wanted to know that we were committed to this and that they're giving us the flexibility to figure out what the future looks like in the coming months.
When the time does come, is your government willing to consider timelines, for example, between the point at which a well is abandoned and the point which is reclaimed? And I'm telling you why I'm asking all this stuff. I understand the acute need in the industry right now, but this has been a problem for a long time. And I know I'm getting a number of questions from people who are concerned that this money is sort of a backstop, even though it's going to do a good thing right now, a backstop for something that industry didn't do in the past.
Our government is prepared. We've had conversations about timelines. We've had conversations about different mechanisms. And again, I want to stress we were well on our way into that conversation before this crisis hit. I'm obviously being cautious that the reality is, as you acknowledge, we are facing a new reality in this country when it comes to the energy industry. So I don't want to commit to the same thing that we would have been talking about a couple months ago. We want to be clear. We need to go back, stabilize the industry, then have a conversation going forward long term. But we are committed to coming in with significant measures that could include timelines, but will include mechanisms that make sure that we are able to move forward without the abandoned well problem getting bigger in the future. Right now, though, the reality is the abandoned well issue is going to grow because of bankruptcies. It's going to grow because our industry is in significant trouble. And so the great news in this announcement, quite frankly, is the fact that we're able to use a mechanism that's important for cleaning up the environment, but at the same time is going to be able to create thousands of jobs in the province and in a sector that needs them right now.
Minister, I want to ask you about the other half of the announcement as well, and that is the liquidity for medium-sized businesses. I heard the Premier say that they're hoping for more. I also spoke to the Finance Minister, as I mentioned, and he signaled there could be more to come for larger companies. Can you be specific for our audience? What is the ask? What more are you hoping for?
Well, some of the numbers that I've heard right now, and obviously it's a very fluid situation, but we are anticipating anywhere between $15 and $30 billion is going to be needed to provide liquidity to the Canadian oil and gas sector for it to survive. So we need to continue those conversations, but liquidity of that level, of an investment of that level, is going to be needed to make sure that not only Alberta's largest industry, but the country's largest industry survives. I would point out when we were in the last big economic crisis in this country, the automobile industry ended up in a tough spot, and our country was able to come in and help the automobile industry survive. And we were able to overcome the overall economic crisis in the 2000s as a result of the strength of the oil and gas industry here in the province of Alberta. We are now in a spot where the oil and gas industry and our energy industry in the province of Alberta needs that help now. And this is important not just to the province that I have the privilege of being the environment minister in. This is important to our entire country. This is our largest industry, an industry that provides somewhere around 800,000 jobs, direct jobs across the country, and billions of dollars in royalty and tax revenue that provide the services that we depend on all across this country. So this is an essential moment in Alberta history where we need to get behind an industry that drives the economic growth of our country.
What's the split there, Minister, between what was announced today? I couldn't get a sort of cap on the amount of credit that would be available, but is that, when you say 15 to 30 billion, is the majority of that needed by big oil companies?
I actually don't know the exact breakdown on that. Certainly, both big and small oil companies need help right now inside the country, inside the province of Alberta. The reality is, though, I think the number between 15 and 30 billion just shows how significant this issue is, and that we need a significant investment. We really appreciate the work the federal government has done with the province of Alberta in the last few weeks, and with the announcements that you saw today. And so we're happy about that. We're going to be working to put people back to work. But I think our main message today is that this has not saved the industry. And we're going to still need to do more work together between all levels of government inside this country. And again, I just want to reiterate that this is just not an Alberta issue. And we're excited. The Premier's spoken a lot about this. The other premiers across the country have also indicated to him and their conversations they recognize that. And we just want to keep articulating how important this is to our country and that our industry is going to need help.
What do you say to Canadians, even Albertans, who are watching right now and are worried a little bit of the possibility of some sort of bailout, or whatever you want to call it, subsidies, credit, extending credit to the bigger companies? And I ask because there is a history in this country of, for example, even with the auto sector bailout, the strings not being attached, layoffs happening later, Canadians losing their jobs, and even with Bombardier, for example, that was loans, but we've seen tons of Canadian jobs lost. And a lot of people sit at home and they say, why did we extend this helpline when we really didn't get, when we didn't get any guarantees that Canadian jobs, for example, would be protected? What do you say to people who are worried and sort of nervous about the idea of helping out or bailing out big companies?
Well, from our perspective, it's not really about big or small companies. It's about creating jobs. And so what I would say to those people is that we agree the important steps that we take right now are to make sure that we're putting people back to work. And at the same time that we're creating and making sure that the industry can survive to long term, put people back to work. And if you see the measures even today that we've worked on both methane and orphan and abandoned wells with the federal government, those have been very specifically designed to create situations where contractors and people that work already within the energy industry are going to be able to leave home and get out in the field and actually get to work. Our goal going forward with whatever packages that we build are ultimately going to be with the lens of how many jobs that it creates. The reality is you're dealing with a very complicated situation, and it's not going to always be perfect. That's just where we're at. But what we do need to understand is that Alberta will continue to constantly focus on measures that will put people back to work. That's where we're at. And so hopefully that provides some level of assurance.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks, Minister Nixon. Appreciate your time this evening, as always.
You bet. Thanks for having me on.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.